A simple trip to the grocery store takes an unexpected and unforgettable turn when an elderly woman makes a shocking remark to rapper Snoop Dogg. Her words? A bold and offensive demand for him to go back to Africa. But what happens next? It's more than just a mic drop. It's a cultural reckoning that leaves the entire store in stunned silence. You won't want to miss this. Like, subscribe, and comment for more eye-opening stories that shake the world. The grocery store buzzed with the usual symphony of daily life. Shopping carts rolling over tiled floors, the occasional beeping of a scanner at the registers, and quiet conversations floating through the aisles. It was just another sunny afternoon in Compton, California, a place deeply rooted in history and culture, and the very neighborhood where Snoop Dogg had spent his childhood. Everything about this day seemed normal, until it wasn't. Near the produce section, an elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, stood hunched over a display of apples. She appeared to be in her late 70s, her thin-framed glasses slipping slightly down her nose as she muttered something under her breath. Dressed in a faded cardigan with her silver hair pinned neatly in place, she looked like any other senior citizen on a routine grocery run. But what was about to unfold would prove she was anything but ordinary. Snoop Dogg, casually dressed in his signature laid-back fashion, a blue Compton hoodie, loose jeans, and sneakers, navigated through the store with ease. He held a basket of groceries in one hand, while texting on his phone with the other, blending effortlessly into the flow of shoppers around him. As he reached for a bag of oranges, he had no idea that a confrontation was just seconds away. Mrs. Thompson's demeanor shifted the moment she noticed him. Her once neutral expression hardened, her lips pressing into a firm line. She turned sharply, her voice louder than necessary as she spoke, ensuring those around her would hear. "You people don't belong here," she spat out, her words slicing through the casual chatter of the store. Snoop's fingers froze over his phone screen. He blinked, lifting his gaze slowly to meet hers. Before he could respond, she continued, her tone growing sharper. "Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" In an instant, the entire atmosphere shifted. The once busy store seemed to pause as if the air itself had thickened. A few shoppers stopped mid-step, their eyes darting between the two figures at the produce section. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others awkwardly pretended not to hear. The rhythm of daily life had come to a screeching halt, replaced by an eerie silence. Snoop Dogg, usually quick-witted and unshaken, stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the words. His brow furrowed slightly, his face unreadable. He could have reacted instantly, fired back, walked away, or caused a scene. But instead, he inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the moment. His reaction wouldn't just be for him. It would be for everyone watching. Mrs. Thompson, still gripping her bag of apples, stood firm, unflinching. She wasn't backing down. The tension was suffocating, stretching through the store like an invisible force. A young mother named Elena hurriedly pushed her cart away, her child in tow. An elderly man by the potatoes, Mr. Ramirez, hesitated, his grip tightening on a bag of onions as he watched closely. Even a teenage employee stacking bananas nearby, Marcus, froze mid-motion, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Snoop finally spoke, his voice calm yet piercing, carrying through the hushed store. "Ma'am," he said, his tone measured, "do you even realize what you just said?" There was no hostility in his words, only a quiet challenge, a chance for her to reflect. But Mrs. Thompson had no interest in reflection. "I said what I said," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is my country. People like you don't belong here." A sharp gasp echoed from the bread aisle, where a young woman named Jessica stood in shock. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, yet Snoop remained unwavering. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He simply let the silence settle. Then, with deliberate care, he placed his grocery basket on the floor, straightening his posture. His presence seemed to expand, his calm demeanor commanding the attention of everyone within earshot. "You said I don't belong here," he repeated, His gaze locked onto hers. "Let me tell you something about where I come from." His words carried weight, each syllable chosen with precision. The store seemed to shrink, every sound fading into the background. All eyes were on him. "My great-great-grandfather was born right here in California," he continued. "But before that, my ancestors were brought here against their will, forced to work, to build this country, the same one you're standing in right now." Mrs. Thompson's lips pressed together tightly, but she said nothing. The crowd, however, was captivated. "My grandfather," Snoop pressed on, his voice gaining quiet strength, "fought in Korea. He risked his life for this country, only to come back and be treated like a second-class citizen. He couldn't sit at the same counters, couldn't drink from the same fountains. But he stayed. You know why?" He let the question hang for a moment. Because he believed in America's promise, even when America didn't believe in him. A heavy silence settled. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade into nothingness. "My parents," he continued, his tone softening but losing none of its power, "fought in their own way. My mother, she's a teacher, spent her life educating kids about love, about equality. My father, a community leader, always helping others, no matter who they are. That's who I am. That's where I come from. So when you tell me I don't belong here," he shook his head, his voice carrying a trace of sadness now. "Ma'am, I am just as much a part of this country as you are. Maybe even more, because my family paid the price for it in blood, sweat, and tears." Mrs. Thompson's face turned red. Her hands trembled slightly. She opened her mouth as if to respond but faltered, unable to find the words. Snoop took a step back, his voice carrying across the store now. "I could have walked away," he said, addressing everyone. "But silence doesn't change ignorance. It's up to us, to all of us, to be better than this." For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap, Derek, stepped forward. "He's right," Derek said, his voice breaking the silence. "We've got to be better than this." A murmuring ripple spread through the store. Mrs. Garcia, an older woman near the frozen foods, nodded. "My father fought in that same war," she said softly, "and he always said the only color that mattered was the red on the flag." Then something remarkable happened. A slow, hesitant clap from the deli counter. James, the butcher, was the first. Then others joined in. It wasn't just applause for Snoop. It was a recognition of truth. Mrs. Thompson, visibly shaken, gripped her cart and hurried toward the exit. She didn't apologize, but the fire in her eyes had dimmed. As Snoop picked up his basket, a young cashier, Ava, looked at him with admiration. "What you said back there," she said softly, "it mattered." Snoop nodded, offering a small but knowing smile. "Sometimes," he replied, "the truth just needs to be heard." And in that moment, the world seemed just a little bit changed.